Hare Krishna, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava, and today we are going to talk about what Bhakti philosophy has to say about suicide. This is a really deep question because I just had a YouTube viewer of mine who was very troubled take his own life, and it gave me occasion to ask some of my teachers some questions about it, and then I shared it on my YouTube channel, and then I got a question about it regarding bhakti. So it's actually a good time to talk about it. It's a little bit of a heavy topic, but it's a real one. So let's dive in. Good day, Achyuta. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. I'm sorry to hear about B. I called this young man B, and I'm sending prayers to him and his family. The timing of this incident happened just as I was about to send you questions about the topic of suicide. I've been going over for a second time your lessons in the Bhakti talks on how to pray for others, karma, bhakti, and the soul of animals, all to try to find the answer, but I thought I would just ask. A very close friend of mine had a brother who took his own life back in May of 2020, and I have explained to him what you explained in the Bhakti and the Souls of Animal lessons about our souls never die and we're all just little rays of light that move on to the next destination. These lessons have soothed my own question about death, and I certainly do not fear it. I've read the book Your Soul's Plan by Robert Schwartz, where it talks about how our soul has chosen this life we are in and how we enter it and how we leave it, all for our soul's growth. And I've also bought the book Suicide and the Soul by James Hillman, but have not yet read it. Yeah, I do recommend that one. It's a really great a read on suicide that goes beyond the sort of conventional, oh well, it was selfish, or oh well, this person was just unable to hack it or something like that, and really dives in a lot deeper to the soul that is a being before and after suicide, right? It's a good way to gain perspective. That book is. My question for you is this: if one commits suicide, is the journey of that soul the same as another who dies otherwise? Growing up as a child, I somehow remember learning that if you commit suicide, you can't go to heaven and that you lay in some sort of middle state. Is the soul of the person who commits suicide still that ray of light that moves on to its next destination? Or is that soul having to do some sort of penance? What exactly happens to the soul of a person who takes their own life? Question was reactivated when I read about B in your video today. Thank you for your time. Hare Krishna, thank you. I guess it's a deep question. So let's just take it piece by piece. If one commits suicide, is the journey of that soul the same as another who dies otherwise? No, and it never would be, because every single soul's journey is completely unique. It's never a cookie cutter thing, right? So there's many ways to die. Suicide is one of them. And the soul existed before the event of suicide, and the soul exists after the event of suicide, just in the same way that the soul existed before and after any other kind of death. And what we learn from the Bhagavad Gita is that the soul has been in the material energy from time immemorial. Anadi is the Sanskrit word used. You guys have heard me say that before on this channel, which means without beginning. So there have been more deaths and lives, births and deaths, than we can count. And the soul has existed before every birth and after every death. So that means that there's no cookie cutter way to judge also a suicide compared to any other kind of death, because we're not God. And the journey between the soul and its relationship with God is infinitely personal, right? You can't, and I say infinitely personal because it is personal. So it's completely unique. And because the soul is eternal, that means that its ongoing relationship with God is infinitely personal. It becomes more and more personal. It's unspeakably, unendingly personal. So these cookie cutter ways of talking about what happens when someone dies in this way or that way that's superstition. That's not truth. There's one thing that makes a huge difference, and this is something that I feel very clear about both as an astrologer and in terms of what I've studied about Bhakti philosophy, which is that the soul, this part of the question really stood out to me. You said, if one commits suicide, is the journey of that soul the same as another who dies otherwise? Growing up as a child, I somehow remember learning that if you commit suicide, you can't go to heaven, you lay in some sort of middle state. Is the soul of the person who commits suicide still that ray of light that moves on to its next destination? Yes, it is. Does it have to do some sort of penance? Well, material existence itself is penance, right? That's what it is. It's a constant act of reaping what we've sown in an illusory state of consciousness. So it's, in other words, we choose things, we do things, and we get the results, and the results are always punitive. In other words, they always involve suffering. And to the degree that we start becoming aware of this, that this is actually the nature of our attempts to, our sojourns and attempts to find happiness in the material world, to the extent that we become aware of that, we become aware of why things are happening to us. And, if I have a little knowledge about why something is happening, and that the ultimate reason for anything happening in the material energy is to bring us back home to God. That every lesson, every event, and every outcome, and every domino series of actions and reactions, that everything in the material world that I do or think, and all the reactions that come as a result, that all of them, if I become reflective, are like a built-in call from a mother to its lost child in the house somewhere. Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Real like worry and concern. And in that level, the experience is not of penance. The material energy itself it becomes translucent. We start to feel the presence of a loving personal God reaching out to us from within it. And so, does the soul have penance? Yes, but it wouldn't matter how it died. Right? The continuation of karma, the continuation of reaping what's been sown, and continuing to go around the wheel of fortune, trying so many new things, experiencing so many different results. The whole thing is sort of is penance. In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that basically that this world is maintained and generated and keeps turning because of yajna, sacrifice. Things eating other things being fed into the sacrificial fire over and over. So we take our own life. We're going to wake up in another life unless God decides to take us home. It's God's prerogative. I have no idea. But my point is that one is going to continue the journey. The journey goes on, and that it wouldn't matter what the next lifetime, like for example, just get really creative with it. It can be helpful as an exercise. I've had my students do this before. Like, imagine that someone commits a really heinous crime and then dies in the process of it, or that someone takes their own life, or something that just seems like just really heavy and difficult. Like, where are they going next? Well, imagine that what was delivered to them next was not some kind of tortured existence where they were blind in one eye and crawling around, and their teeth fell out and they were ugly, nobody liked them, like just kind of like, oh, look at your punishment, or what I mean, some caricature of like totally punished next life. Think a little bit, be a little bit more sophisticated, right? Think about someone takes their own life, and in the next life, maybe they lose a child early, right? Because they maybe their parents were very grieved at them leaving early. And in the next lifetime, perhaps they lose a child early, not to suicide necessarily, they just lose a child early. Or perhaps in the next lifetime, someone commits suicide. What would penance look like? Well, maybe they're put into an incredibly wealthy situation, right? It's just like, well, how's that penance? Because they're given a lot of wealth, but they fall asleep in it, and they continue to be more deeply immersed in illusion, right? And those are the punitive situations. So that, in other words, and I don't do that to say that I have any insight about what actually happens to a soul in the next life after suicide. I say it simply to get the wheels turning. You could go in the opposite direction. What if in suicide, in the moment of suicide, the soul was flooded by an incredible realization of divinity, right? And they what have I done? I can't believe I've done this. How do we know what goes through the mind of someone in the moment of taking their own life when they realize, oh, I've just done it, right? What change does that affect in the soul, right? We don't know. How could you possibly imagine? They could wake up in the next lifetime a saint for all I know. You know what I mean? So you have to get really creative to understand how creative and personal and individual every soul's journey is with God, you know? I hope that that helps. Again, I'm not trying to say I know that anything happens or that it's bad to commit suicide or not. I don't know. I find obviously it's very tragic when people take their own lives. And this young man, it was really painful. The other thing that I will say is this, is that the Bhagavatam and the Gita also tell us, all over the place that once you start walking down a spiritual path, let's just call it an altar call. You have an existential altar call of one kind of or another. And you just turn your life over to God on some rainy Wednesday, and you're just like, I just give up. I know God's real, and I have to learn to live in harmony with God's work in the world and in me. I've just that moment of surrender, whatever that looks like. When a soul has that, then it's like done deal, right? The plug is pulled out of the power source. The blades might keep spinning for a while, lifetimes may keep going, but the thing powering it has been turned off. That happens in the soul. A little light gets clicked on. And we're told throughout the Bhakti literature that when this switch happens and a person really gives over their heart and soul in surrender, that you can never lose the progress that you make from that point forward. It's as though it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of lifetimes and more things to experience. And it's like getting in the queue at the DMV. It's like, okay, I've got a ticket. It's gonna happen. It's like, there's a great story though of these two devotees in this kind of allegory I've heard or something. I don't know where this came from, but two devotees, and one devotees of the Lord, and someone who has knowledge of. I mean, maybe it's Krishna. Krishna says, "Look, I have some good news for you guys. I can tell you when you're going to return home to me. How many more lifetimes, And it's like the first one is like, he's like, okay, well, it's actually the same for both of you. And it's like, you have a million more lifetimes. There's going to be that one person who goes, oh my God, it's over. There's an end in sight. And they just start dancing. A million? No problem. An end is in sight. And then there's the other person who goes, oh my God, a million more years, right? And in some ways, like, that's the adjustment we have to make when it comes to the soul's journey with God. Because the second person just isn't getting it, right? If you're on a spiritual path, done deal. It's just a process. Just you're being pulled along by grace, and we don't even know it. So that trust in the heart, that faith, if we have honest moments like that, sincere moments in the heart, that's it. It's done deal, just a matter of time. So, for example, this soul B was really into spiritual life. In fact, was into Bhakti Yoga. So I'm not worried about him in the least, because I know that this is however difficult that karma may be or may not, and however it may or may not carry over into the next life. I know that the piety, the faith, the surrender of heart and soul, that's going to keep going. That's going to show up, because that's what Krishna tells us. That's what all the great sages of bhakti tell us. You can't lose that progress. It comes back. And even if you fall down in some way, eventually you will be reborn into a situation where you'll remember your faith and you'll keep going. So that's maybe the ultimate promise that just says, look, and I believe that there's a lot of that grace, and that there's a lot of people out there who are really hurting, who have called out to God honestly, who are tortured inside, and who may take their lives not so much out of weakness or selfishness or anything like that, but just because it's just like any other disease. People die of diseases all the time, right? So, in that case, it's like, I believe that we're fortunate for our health. We should always be very grateful for our health, and also know that ill health of any kind is not necessarily a sign that someone is impious or unholy. And that's a lot of that can be very damaging to other people to think that way. So anyway, those are some wandering thoughts, I guess, but I hope that it's been helpful. The last thing I will say is that there is no, I've never read, and if someone correct me if I'm wrong, I have never read anything that states that there is a specific place, an intermediary space, or some specific kind of penance for suicide in any of the bhakti literature. And so that's what I'm going off from today. Everything that I've heard says, look, it's totally unique to each soul. And, the process is uniquely personal. You can't wrap your head around it or cookie cutter, or, it's not our place to judge either. So that the fear that we have for another soul in what they might encounter in the next lifetime, because of the judgment we have of what happened to them or what they did, none of that is really helping the soul. If we want to be embodiments of God's love to others, none of that fear or judgment really helps. Our prayers, our love, our compassion, our mercy. Um, how does God speak to the world? In part through those who embody God's own mercy, love, compassion, sensitivity, patience. So we have to do that, because that's so you have to hold that space for the people, for other people, and especially for the person who's passed. So I've been trying to do that for B. All right, good topic. And I hope that, again, that you enjoyed this. If you have any questions for me about Bhakti, info@nightlightastrology.com. Put Bhakti question in the subject line. All right, that's what I've got for today. Hare Krishna.